Hey, it's me. How are you, folks? Welcome to another episode of the Paul Leslie Hour. On this episode, we have a very special guest. We're joined by one of the most legendary record producers of all time. Tony Brown is joining us, and among other things, we're going to talk about his new coffee table book entitled ELVIS Straight to Jesus. The book is a photographic journey of his 40-year career. It's got historical, never-before-seen pictures and contemporary portraits of many rock, country, and gospel music icons, all of which Tony Brown produced. Tony Brown has produced hundreds of #1 songs. Some of his many titles include being the co-founder of Universal South Records, the former president of MCA Records Nashville, and Tony Brown has produced hits for George Strait, Reba McEntire, Vince Gill. He's also worked with everyone from Jimmy Buffett and Lionel Richie to Barbra Streisand. Tony Brown's career is credited with over 100 #1 singles, record sales exceeding 100 million units. He's also signed many legendary artists to record deals, people like Trisha Yearwood, Patty Loveless, Marty Stuart, Rodney Crowell, Joe Eli, Kelly Willis, Todd Snider, Allison Moorer, the Mavericks, Shooter Jennings. We could keep on going. It's a great honor to welcome Tony Brown, and as the title of the book says, ELVIS Straight to Jesus. Tony Brown's family and his background is steeped in gospel music, which is one of the things that led him to being a piano player for Elvis Presley. So, Tony Brown, what did your gospel background give you?
I think it gave me that real heartfelt, soulful feeling that I think a lot of black artists like Whitney Houston acquiesced to the church, you know. It's like R&B is really soulful, and of course, I was raised in Baptist churches which had some of the worst music I've ever heard. That was out of tune, you know, singing all those hymns. Like, it didn't matter if you could sing in tune, you just sang in the choir. And then my dad was an evangelist, and we'd go to Pentecostal churches, which Elvis was a Assembly of God. And, you know, most people today don't know the layers. Like in Baptists, there's Southern Baptists, and there's Hardshell Baptists, and then there's just Baptists. And then in Pentecostal, there's Assembly of God, Church of the Living God, Nazarene, and then you get into the really Pentecostal, like holiness churches where they speak in tongues and throw babies in the air and stuff like that. And my dad, we would play all kinds of churches, even black churches, and it really, like, I think Whitney Houston always talks about, what is that family, that black family that lives here in Nashville? I can't think of their names, but she always references them, you know, because they were like almost like a contemporary Christian version of soul music, like Aretha with a new modern spin to it. What is that family that sings here? I can't think of their names. But anyway, I think it made me realize how music can really tear your heart out, you know. I mean, Elvis, man, when he would sing some of those songs, like when he sang "How Great Thou Art," it was like a different thing than when people in gospel music sing. He sang it like it was a soulful song, you know, like a soul song. And when George Beverly Shea sang it, which is the first record I ever bought, was George Beverly Shea singing "How Great Thou Art," because my dad wouldn't let me listen to any pop music. So I never really was into Elvis until I got with him. I just thought of him as a celebrity, not the king of rock and roll. You know, as I've gotten older, I am really diving into all these documentaries that are out, like about David Geffen, about Glenn Johns and Eric Martin, and the thing that Iovine and Dr. Dre had out called the Defiant Ones. You know, just learning about the history of what made hip-hop, and traditional country to George Strait. Everybody thinks George Strait is a traditional artist. He's not. He's really a hybrid form of traditional music. He pulled from Haggard and Ferlin Husky and all those kind of guys, but he was really like Alan Jackson. He was more of a hybrid form, modern form of that. And so I don't know. I find myself studying music more today as I'm sort of at the peak of my career and look back on it, because it's such a young man's world right now. A lot of pluggers that used to plug songs to me for George Strait. Michael Knox is producing Jason Aldean. And then Jeff Stevens, who wrote all those big hits for George that I produced, called Carrying Your Love With Me, Carried Away, True. I used to he would cut demos, and they were so perfect. You know, the intro, every part, every instrumental part, I would just copy his demos for the most part. And then when he started producing Luke Bryan, I was going, I knew he was a producer back in those days. He just had that way of knowing how to make the intro a hook and the chorus a hook and all that kind of stuff. I find myself very kind of analyzing music these days and looking back on it.
How do you know when you want to work with an artist?
Man, that's a good question. You know, it's got to be, I've got to like it for one thing. I mean, in the beginning, I left RCA to go to MCA with Jimmy Bowen because RCA wouldn't let me produce anything because I didn't have a track record. And so I said, well, how do you get a track record if you don't get an opportunity? And so Nora Wilson, who was the head of A&R at the time I was there, he let me co-produce a song on Steve Wariner that went #1. And I don't even think I charged to do it. I just would have paid to do it just to be on a record. And so when I went to MCA in '84, Jimmy Bowen came to town, and he was puzzled that all the record companies were run by people who were like accountants and, as they call them, suits. And so Bowen he's a producer. He came to town as a producer, and he wanted an A&R department that was the face of the label. And so he hired me from RCA because I had signed Alabama. And so I had, as an A&R person, I had a little thing there that was big for me. That made me like a good A&R guy. Because when I signed them, I didn't even know they were that good. I had no idea they'd become the biggest act in the business. I just started paying attention. You know, the best way to make it in this industry is just to pay attention. And so I just started paying attention. I was just so absorbed in songwriters. When I first got into business, I thought musicians were the stars because I wasn't even into country music that much because I was raised in gospel. And then before I got with RCA, I had just finished playing with Emmylou Harris, who had just cut that first album, which was kind of a springboard from country rock back over in the West Coast, like the Byrds and the Eagles and the Poco and all those kind of things. And I liked that, but that was considered kind of pop music in Nashville. And riding on the bus with Emmylou, I learned more about country music than I ever would have learned from anybody in town, because she was a big fan of bluegrass and a big fan of real hillbilly music and mountain music. So I had big wide eyes, and I paid attention to every aspect of the business. And so when I got with Bowen, he let me start signing acts. He said, okay, I'm going to produce all the stars on the label. I want you to go out and find me something that you like and bring it to me. So the first thing I brought to him was Patty Loveless, and he thought she was too much of a hillbilly. And I thought her voice was like just so real, so authentic. Then I found out she was like a distant cousin of Loretta Lynn. And I signed her just off of my instinct, just thinking, God, this is really good. And boy, it took about 2 or 3 years for the label to get turned on to her. I had to like fight for her. You know, I found out how much I really loved her because I had to like stand up for her when nobody else would. And so it's an instinct thing. I first was turned on to people, singer-songwriters, I think, first, because being around Rodney Crowell when I was playing with Emmylou and being around those kind of songwriters, I was attracted to singer-songwriters. That's why some of my first signings were Steve Earle and Lyle Lovett. I thought Steve Earle was the next Waylon, and the press said he was the next Mellencamp Springsteen, and that's really what he was. He wasn't the next Waylon, but he was the only person that had that kind of stubbornness that Waylon had. You know, Waylon would only use his band, and the records were real sloppy, according to Jerry Bradley, my boss. But Waylon stood by his guns, and you know, he's one of the biggest, most important figures in country music. Johnny Cash. I mean, I look back on the people that are icons like Cash, Waylon, Loretta. They were really raw. You know, Patsy Cline was pretty slick. Owen Bradley, when he cut Walking After Midnight with the strings and everything, that became the style called countrypolitan or something like that. Because he used strings, you know, that's a no-no. But then back in those days, there weren't country charts, R&B charts. There was just pop charts, and pops that were popular. Pop is not a genre of music. Pop usually pretty much leans more toward rock and adult contemporary and sort of, or you know, folky, just more anything but a real hard R&B or real hard country. And then when a record crossed over, like Ronnie Millsap or Dolly Parton, they became crossover records. And then when SoundScan came out in like 86 maybe, and then, because up to that point, the charts were not based on sales. All of a sudden, the top 5 records in the Billboard chart, on the pop chart, were Garth Brooks, Clint Black, Vince Gill, and everybody went, wow, I had no idea. And then they called it mainstream music. So, you know, I got into, Jimmy Bowen let me sort of run free, you know. He's basically, when you look at his discography, you know, he co-produced the Kenny Rogers in the First Edition. And then he did Sinatra, he did Dean Martin, and he was part of that whole, the L.A., Vegas, the Brat Pack kind of guys, you know. But he'd been studying Nashville and was going, man, they need help over there because they're cutting songs. And so he moved here to help. In his mind, he moved here to help out Nashville. And believe it or not, he did, but everybody in town hated his guts because they thought he was a sleazy carpetbagger. He did, you know, and even when I went to work for him, all my friends said, why are you doing that? I said, because he offered me, like, Joe Galante offered me to stay at RCA making $30,000 a year as a manager of A&R, and Bowen offered me a VP of A&R and $100,000 a year in a black Cadillac. And he said, and he guaranteed me, he said, I'll let you, I know you want to be a producer, so I'll let you co-produce 3 records immediately with me. Jimmy Buffett and Steve Wariner, and that was a big deal for me, you know. Jimmy Buffett, man, I'd already known he was like starting to break open because Margaritaville had already come out, and I felt like I was in the game. And then he said, "Go find me some stuff that you like." And so I found Steve Earle and Patty and Lyle Lovett, and he fought me on that, but he fought me to see if I'd fight back, and I did. I just, you know, I started going, man, when I like something, I really like it, and I stand up for it. And word got around town that I was a maverick. I wasn't a maverick. I just thought I should speak up, you know. The records that really defined my breakout was records that did not sell lots of records, like Patty and Steve and Lyle. Although eventually we did have a gold record on Lyle and 2 gold records on Lyle and 1 on Steve. But they were like a break from tradition. And so to see, when I see an artist, I don't know, I saw Trisha Yearwood at Douglas Corner, and it was when everybody was doing showcases, like in 86, 87. And every A&R person was there. And she sang, "She's in Love with the Boy" at the showcase. And at the time, I was A&R looking for songs for Reba, for Bowen, you know, for him to cut on Reba. And so I would get all these demos. Every chick demo was her singing them. And then I was going, oh, that's that girl that sings all those demos. She's really good. And so after the showcase, I said, hey, can you get that song you did, "She's in Love with the Boy"? She said, yeah, Garth Fundus got it for me to cut. He's going to shop a deal with it. And I said, you got a deal right now. And we walked out, and the girl from RCA said, I can't believe you offered her a deal on one song. I'd have to hear something on tape to see what she sounds like. I said, Mary, go look in your drawer. Every song that's pitched to a chick on RCA is her. And if it's not her, it's usually Gretchen Wilson or Kathy Mattea. And so, you know, I'd already heard Trisha. And that night, man, she sang "She's in Love with the Boy." I was smart enough to know, and that was early in my career, that was a number one song. That was her first single, and man, she went blasting to the stratosphere after that.
We're talking with Tony Brown. You mentioned the name Jimmy Bowen. Now, that's a producer. His name has come up a few times. What would you say it was that Jimmy Bowen taught you?
Well, when I learned that he believed in himself. He was a bit of a narcissist, but he was just really confident because he had done so many big things, you know. And he had. Have you ever met Jimmy Bowen?
I never have.
Yeah, well, he changed my life. I mean, he really did, because when he hired me and made me a VP, it was a stepping out, because when he was hiring me, everybody in town, you know, back in those days, in '84, when a record label president changed hands, because back then it was, I can't think who ran Warner Brothers, but it was Columbia back in those days. Rick, what's his name? Anyway, when somebody left, Jerry Bradley ran RCA. When somebody left the label to go to another label, it was like they're taking over. And the word started spreading around town when I was at RCA, said Jimmy Bowen's taking over MCA. He was at Warner Brothers. He'd come into town at Warner Brothers through Elektra, and then they got rid of whoever was running the label at the time and put Bowen in charge. And then Bowen took Hank Jr. and made him like the biggest star in country music. And all of a sudden, Warner Brothers was a really player. And he started flying in musicians from L.A. to play on the records, and other musicians in town thought that was like flying a whore into Las Vegas, right? But when I got with Bowen, he would say, he called me T. Hey, T, people think that I'm a carpetbagger, and they think that I'm just trying to be too L.A. He's the first one to start having food catered to the studio between sessions, because sessions were usually 2 a day, 10 to 2, break for an hour, union break, and then 2 to 6. And everybody said he was being L.A., and so Bowen said, I'm not doing that to be L.A., I'm just doing that to keep the musicians in the studio, because when I got here, all the players would go on the break out to eat and get drunk and come back and kill my session. So I just kept them in the studio and fed them. And I thought, well, that makes sense. And Bowen taught me a lot about time management. You know, he was doing like 12 records at a time. And I was wondering, everybody would say, how can he do that? And so I was his A&R guy. So I said, how do you do that? He said, well, here's the way it goes, T. You got to be there for tracks. You got to be there when you cut the track so you can say, that's the one. And then you got to comp together the lead vocal, so that it's the final vocal and get it approved by the artist. You got to be there for that. But you can pick the parts of the different takes they did and mark it out for an engineer. Then you go home and they can put it together, and then you can come back in the next day and smooth it out and make it perfect. He said, you don't have to be there all night long. But me, in the beginning, I was there for everything. I just wanted to be there to see how it was all done. I stayed and comped it myself with engineers till 3 or 4 in the morning. And then he said, you don't need to be there for the backgrounds, but if you like doing that sort of thing, do it. And I did that. He said, and when you mix it, leave it with your engineer. Let him know what you want as you're cutting the record, and you can leave it with him all day long. Come check in about 5 or 6 o'clock, and he'll have it where he thinks it's done, and you can say, no, let's pan the still over to the left and not the right. Let's put a little more delay on that guitar, pull the backgrounds down, and then tell him to stay there and do that. Then you'll come back the next morning at 10 o'clock, and you can close it. And then just do that over and over and over. So you can be working, you can be comping while your engineer is putting the comp together. And I was going, everybody thinks he's full of it, but he was dead serious about stuff. And he said, if you want Dean Parks, the guitar player from L.A., he's like the main acoustic player and electric player in L.A. If you want Dean Parks to play on one song, fly him in. You'll get a bunch of shit for it, but fly him in. It's worth it. I mean, it's an airplane ticket. It's worth, $500, maybe a rent-a-car. And if that guitar part makes the song a hit, and lots of times the intro by the guitar or the solo by the guitar, like Don Felder's solo on Hotel California, that was worth it all, right?
Yeah.
You know, he said, so if you know it's worth it, do it, because that shows you got courage and you got taste. It was a long time before I had the guts to fly in Russ Kunkel and Leland Sklar to play on a record with Reba. But man, it made a big difference, and all the players in the room never get a chance to play with Leland Sklar and Russ Kunkel. You know who they are, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I'd heard of all those James Taylor records and stuff, and so I was just mesmerized that they were in my session. But I started learning this casting became a big deal, and that's what Bowen did. He cast the players. You know, I would cast the Muscle Shoals guy to play the B3, and he taught me all how to do all that kind of stuff. And then he always said, listen to your artist. It's their record, not your record. They may be wrong, but give them a chance. If somebody's going to hang them, let them hang themselves. You don't hang them. And so I did things that I believed in. He taught me, but then I didn't do the things I didn't believe in. Like one time he told me, he said, he had so much verb on this George Strait record that he was producing. And I said, God, that's just way too much verb for me. And here was his comeback. He says, T, you know, they just saw George Strait at the Coliseum last night, and those Coliseums, it just roars around. When they buy the record, they want it to sound like that. And I was thinking to myself, no, they don't. So the first record I got to produce on George was Pure Country. Bowen said, don't use the B3. Strait doesn't like B3 on his records. And I always used the B3 because I'd studied Chip's Moman. I study producers to this day. I mean, I'm really kind of drawn into what's going on right now in pop music and country music. There's just all these people there's not many guitars on the records, usually a loop instead of a drummer. It's really just a layer behind the artist. And, you know, like a lot of my Reba records, like Fancy, that was a big, we tried to get the same vibe that, who had Ode to Billy Joe? Bobby Gentry had on the original record. And that was pretty hard to accomplish that. You know, it's hard to copy something that happened naturally back in those days, but we got pretty damn close. And it never was a number one record for Reba, but it's the biggest hit she ever had. If you go see Reba and she doesn't do Fancy, you're going to be really upset. So I just started gleaning things from Bowen, because, you know, some of those records, like going back to Houston on Dean Martin and My Way on Sinatra, I mean, you got to look at that and go, man, I wonder if I'll ever be able to do that. And then you just realize one person can kill a session, you know. So casting is really important. And it's like somebody said, how do you get to be a producer? And I said, get the label to trust you with the budget. And because I remember there was a guy that was producing, Greg Brown produced Travis Tritt, and they pulled him off. And when they pulled him off, Tritt quit having hits. And I said, wonder why Warner Brothers pulled Greg off those Travis records. They said, he always went over budget. and I was going, I'm going to go talk to Bowen about that. And Bowen said, I would just hammer him, but man, that was the dumbest thing. You know, he knew where to go with Tritt. And after Tritt lost him, the magic went away. It's like Pete Anderson with Dwight Yoakam in the beginning, you know. Pete produced those records and played guitar. And when Pete left Dwight's still an icon. I mean, he'll always be one. But he never quite reached that little spot that he and Pete had going. So I learned how to go to that sweet spot for every artist. When I took over George, I mean, I wasn't trying to change him. Bowen got him from Blake Nevis, who cut those early records like Amarillo by Morning and all that stuff. And Bowen's first record, I think, was what's that, California? Oh, God, I can't think of the title. But anyway, he just started changing the way the records sounded, a little more verb, and his opinion of what the kick drums should sound like. You know, he would sample a kick he liked, and he started doing some of those new techniques that all the new producers were doing. So when I got George, I just was going to copy what Bowen was doing, because Bowen kind of copied what Blake Nevis was doing. You know, there's certain kind of intros and stuff that George has always had that sound like a George Strait intro, just like Reba has a bunch of things that you always could put on one of her records because it sound like a Reba record. And so when I got Pure Country, it was a different record for George because it was for a movie, and then Warner Pictures sent in a guy from the West Coast at the movie company to sort of watch me, and that first song, Pure Country, at first it was called the first song was called Heartland, right?
Yeah.
It was the first single, big hit. Well, it was first written called Pure Country, and it was written about cornbread and all that kind of stuff, hay bales and stuff, and I spoke up, not knowing I shouldn't, and the writers went and rewrote it and called it Heartland, and it was a big hit. And I had put Brent Rowan, who's played on like 90% of all the hit records in Nashville, for the guitar solo in the middle, right? And he played that solo that probably 10 years or any other artist would have used. The guy from Warner Pictures took it back to L.A. and put Dean Parks on there without me even being there, and that's the solo you hear. If you see the video on CMT, they got the copy of the single before we finished the album, and it has Brent Rowan on it. And then you buy the album, and it's got Dean Parks on it. I just started learning about all those kind of things. It fascinated me. And for Dean Parks, it was like a rock solo. It wasn't like a chicken picking kind of twangy solo like Brent played, and that's what George has always had. But George didn't, he didn't say a word. He went with it. And then I did have B3 on that album, and George says, "Now what is that again?" I said, "It's the B3." He says, "I like that." And I really started learning to believe in myself when certain little things like that happen. I just started believing in myself. But I've never really tried to change George. I think that the reason George has had 60 number ones, and by the way, I did 37 of those, is because he didn't try to push the envelope. He just found great songs, man. I mean, the best of the best. I mean, I used to listen to thousands of songs before he'd go in the studio, and then he'd come in and sing them, and he knew them. He came in to sing, and I never thought about George being a great singer, but people always compared him to Sinatra. He's a country music Sinatra, and I thought, well, I've never thought about Sinatra being a great singer. But then I started analyzing it, and I was going, oh, I get it. When they sing, it's like conversation. Sinatra, he's not like a scatter, like Chris Stapleton or what's a good pop singer back in those days. When he sings, it's like it falls out of his mouth. It's like a second nature. And George is the same way. It's like every man's voice is George Strait. Since then I've worked with Rodney Dunn and Vince Gill, who are two of the greatest singers in the world, and Trisha Yearwood and Reba, two of the best female singers, and Lionel. So I know what good singers are. I mean, I listen to pop music, and the Julie Steinfields and Julie Michaels and the Haley Steinfields, and a lot of those they are just the sound, the voice they all sort of sound alike, and it works, because everybody likes the same, it seems, anyway. Because right now in country, all this bro country thing is happening, which I can't relate to, because I loved when Buck represented Bakersfield and Haggard, and then like Alan represents Georgia. He's East Coast South country music. Like Alan is different than George Strait's Texas style. And once you start knowing that, oh, I get it. And Memphis R&B is different than Detroit. I don't know. I became in the school, because I can't read music, but I have been so blessed. I mean, I was Elvis's last piano player, and I got that job because I played with J.D. Sumner. Not because I was a fabulous piano player, but Elvis had heard me play with J.D. Sumner. So when Glenn D. Harden quit to go tour with Emmylou Harris, I got that job. Like it's just sort of right place, right time. And then Elvis dies, and Glenn D. leaves Emmylou to go play with John Denver. Emmylou hires me because I play like Glenn D. I just kept my eyes open and going, oh, this is how it works. Sliding doors, and you just always make sure whatever you do your best at it. when A&M cut a tribute record to Leonard Cohen, Billy Joel came to Nashville. He wanted to cut his song with the guy that produced Guitar Town. And I was going, well, that's bizarre. And then I recorded one song on Barbra Streisand, an album that David Foster had started. It was a love song album. She wanted to cut a song that James Brolin had played on their first date. It was a George Strait song. It was a song written kind of like a cabaret kind of swing, Vegas-y thing, you know. So I could hear her doing that. And so I get a call to come out to produce that, and I think I'm being punked, but it's for real. So I take Paul Franklin, the steel player, with me, and I take Stuart Duncan, the fiddle player that plays on all of George's records. He's like in a really good bluegrass band. And I went out there, and everybody told me what a bee she was going to be, and she was so sweet to me, man. I mean, and she would say, "Hey, turn up that thing over there he's playing." It was Paul Franklin on the steel. And she said, "I want more of that in my headphones." And Paul Franklin said, "Thank you, Barbara, because in Nashville, they always say, take the damn steel out of my phones." So, you know, I was out there going, man, I felt like I was almost experiencing the Peter principle, which is when you rise to the level of your incompetence, right? But, you know, it went off really good. And as I was leaving the studio, I was telling the engineer and some of the musicians, I said, "Man, she was so sweet." And they said, "It's probably because you're from Nashville." It like me, because I'm like a simple person or something. I said, "No, I think it's because I was nice to her." But anyway, I would have never in a million years believed I would have ever done that. And I wasn't scared, because after working with Bowen, you know, I just had learned how to get the scared demon out of my body, because he could eat your lunch, spit you out. But he really changed my life in a lot of ways. And he was I got a coffee table book coming out called ELVIS Straight to Jesus. And I have everybody sitting. I sort of go through intervals in my life, and I have this French Renaissance chair I put a person in, like my piano teacher, then my J.D. Sumner's nephew. J.D.'s passed away, so I put his nephew in the chair because it represents the Elvis years and the gospel years. And then as I got forward, I put Glenn D. Harden. I thought I didn't put Glenn D. Harden in there. I like followed him twice in big gigs that changed my life. You know, because when I got with Amy Lou, she got pregnant and quit playing, and so the hot band became the Cherry Bombs, Rodney Crowell's band, and Roseanne Cassie's band. And that's where I met Vince Gill. And so all these people are in there in the little paragraphs about them. So I've really paid attention all along the way and realized what being around a person and taking that person serious, and take everything you do serious, and be able to have no said to you a lot and not let it hurt your feelings, you know.
We're talking with record producer Tony Brown. The book title, your forthcoming book, ELVIS Straight to Jesus. Straight, S-T-R-A-I-T. Great title.
Right. Straight being to, you know, because when I told Melissa, my manager, I hired her to do, and her husband to do my website. And as we were doing my website, she said, "Man, you should write a book." And I said, "I've been through this." I went to New York to meet with all the publishers just before Keith Richards' book came out, and Steven Tyler's and Eric Clapton's. And they said, "Man, your story is really interesting, but nobody knows who you are. So if you're doing this to make money, don't do it. Do it only because you can't help yourself. And it's going to take you about 5 or 6 years." He said, "All these books, Clapton, Steven Tyler, probably the only one that's going to really sell is Keith." And he's right. I bought all those books. The only one I've read is Keith. I wanted to see if he and Mick did really hate each other. And I wanted to see if Steven Tyler had any naked girls in his book. He had no pictures. And so I told Melissa, I said, if I did a book, it would not be an autobiography. I'd tell my story in pictures, because all through the years, since I was a kid, I got pictures, photographs of my family in church. Then I got pictures of me on tour with Elvis sent to me by fans. And then at the record business I was in for 25 or 30 years, I've got pictures from every number one party, every gold record party, with every major star in the business and every major record executive. We could use it. We got the content. I didn't realize you got to get permission from all the photographers, and that took a long time. But I'm telling my story in pictures, and so you can see me get a little bit older, and you get to see Vince and Reba, and you get to see Steve turn from James Dean into, he looks like an old hippie from down in the meatpacking district in New York or something. But you know, it's like you get to see my story in pictures, and then I set one person in the chair, then I write, like about Bowen, I write, he was a scary person. You know, one time when he met with me to hire me, he hired me to play organ B3 on a Hank Jr. session when Hank was at his biggest. And my assistant said, "That's Jimmy Bowen wants you to come play tonight on Hank Jr." I went, "Oh my God, I don't play B3. It's a keyboard like a piano, but it's really a gift the way you play it. It's like an art form, you know." He said, "Well, go do it. If he fires you, you know, the union requires you to cancel a session in 7 days, or you get paid anyway. You know, so why don't you go?" So I went, and I get there, and I'm going, boy, I just stepped in it big time. I want to embarrass myself. And they said, "Hey, Bowen's upstairs. He wants to see you." So I go up there. I never met the man. He's sitting there in that chair leaning back with his sunglasses on, those little strings, the ones you hang around your neck, you know. He said, "Well, hello, Mr. Brown." He said, "I've been watching you over there at RCA signing them big acts, and that record you did with Nora Wilson. You got promise. I could make you a great producer." I said, "Well, good." He said, I'm taking over MCA in March of '84, and I think I might want you to be my A&R guy." I said, "Count me in, man." So I leave there, and I call my attorney, and I said, "Hey, Bill, I just talked to Bo, and he wants to hire me," he says. I said, "But I'm probably one of 10. So my attorney chased it and got it, and he said, "You got the gig, man." And he's promised you to co-produce 3 records right up front, one being Jimmy Buffett. So for the next 4 months, all around Nashville, "Hey, man, Bowen's taking over, you know that?" I said, "I heard that. Guess who he's hiring for his A&R guy?" I said, "Who?" They said, "Jerry Crutchfield," because Jerry produced Lee Greenwood and Tanya Tucker for MCA. And I said, "Well, that makes total sense, because he's like a kind of a producer with a track record." I called Bill back up, and I'd say, "Man, do I have the job?" He says, "Don't say a word. Just be quiet." So make a long story short, about a week before the announcement was supposed to be made, I'm walking out the back of RCA. Here comes this white Fleetwood Cadillac with the black windows and a driver. I know it's Bowen. He stops right in front of me, and the window goes, and he said, "You still in?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Good." And so anyway, from that moment on, my life has been like a screenplay. And so I wanted this book to sort of come off that way. And so when I'm taking pictures, everybody has sat in the chair except Bowen. I had to fly out and sit on his couch in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I said, "You know what, Bowen? I need to sit on your couch, because I wouldn't even have a book without you." And I just loved the way, all the things that happened making this book. I was getting really kind of afraid to call people up and say, "Would you mind coming sitting in this chair at my house?" But everybody was happy to do it. I mean, Jerry Bradley, who was the one, you know, he was Owen Bradley's son, and he's the one that did the Outlaws album that changed country music forever. I mean, that's the first platinum album in country music. And so nobody sees him. He never goes out. And he came to my house, and I told people that. They said, "Jerry Bradley came to your house?" And as he comes in, he goes, "So I guess everybody that's come in here has told you what's happening now, and then others have told you how it all started. I'm going to tell you what happened in between." And so, you know, I've got just great memories of putting this book together, and it's made me look back on my life in a different way. I mean, I really have been really lucky, you know, and luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? And so that's the way it's been for me. I'm so glad that my years sitting in the MCA chair as a producer was 89 to 97, because the class of 89 was Garth, Clint, Vince, Alan, Brooks and Dunn, when Reba really broke, that was the class of '89, and records, every record I produced sold platinum or 3 million. I thought I was a genius. And now, you look at across country music, and on all the labels combined, there's maybe 6 acts that are selling platinum. It's just really a strange place. Then you got Chris Stapleton, who radio won't play, and he still sells more than anybody else. And it's just amazing. And I'm just astonished. But I think, man, how lucky was I to be sitting in my chair from '89 to '97, the Gilded Age, the golden years.
We're talking with record producer Tony Brown. One of the artists you've mentioned a few times, very unique artist, Jimmy Buffett.
Jimmy Buffett, yeah. And I had heard about him. One of my best friends, Don Light, used to book gospel music. He was the big agent for gospel music acts. And so one day, I was in his office, and he said, "Hey, come in here. I'm going to play somebody I found." And he played me Jimmy Buffett. He played me Come Monday. And then I was, I didn't get it because I didn't know much about pop music, and I didn't know much about Jimmy Buffett. So he told me about it. Jimmy had a fan base that was incredible down there in the South, in the Gulf region. And then he played me Why Don't We Get Drunk and Screw, and I was going, man, this is really bizarre, because that was all against everything I was raised in, evangelical right-wing fanatics, And I got to know him just because of Don Light. And then when I got with Bowen, Buffett had been on MCA back in the early days. He was ABC, which was bought by MCA. Then he'd been produced by Norbert Putnam in town during the Margaritaville and Cheeseburgers in Paradise and all that stuff. And he was on the LA label, and they were getting bored. They wanted some multi-platinum pop acts, right? And Buffett's a lifestyle artist. So Bowen, being the kind of character he is, he was observing this. So he called Bowen up, and he called Howard Kaufman up in Irving, because Irving Azoff was running MCA at the time when I came. And Irving managed, or his company, Frontline, managed Buffett. So Bowen calls Buffett and Howard Kaufman and Irving and says, bring him, what he does is kind of in between folk and country, but he's a pop artist. He's not a cowboy.
Yeah.
Let me do a couple records on him out of here, and maybe we'll have a country #1 record, and, it'll be a little fun for him, and get him back on the road map again. So he comes over, and the first thing we cut is Riddles in the Sand, which had the first single, well, Who's the Blonde Stranger. It didn't really connect, but it made an impact. He got he started getting bigger ticket sales and everything. And then we did The Last Mango in Paris, because Buffett was co-writing all that stuff with, what's his name? Will
Jennings.
Will Jennings, and Will had written a lot of great country songs in the past. And so, to me, the plus about that, I got to know Will Jennings really well, because they wrote both those albums together. And while they were doing The Last Mango, I was on a boat with Will that Buffett had rented for them to hang out on. And Will said, hey, he had just written that Ark of the Diver album for Steve Winwood, which I really loved. He said, hey, I just wrote a new song for Steve Winwood. Tell me what you think about it. And he played me Higher Love, the demo. And I went, oh, my God, this sounds like a big hit to me. He said, you think so? I said, hell yeah. And then after that, he wrote that Up Where We Belong with Cocker and Jennifer Warnes. Then he wrote the Titanic thing with Celine. So just being around that caliber of writer, I've noticed, like Buffett, when you go see Buffett, I went to see Buffett when he had the launch of one of his books in New York. So me and Bowen go up there, and we're walking up the stairs behind Walter Cronkite, Caroline Kennedy, Ed, what's that, the black guy that Buffett loved so much that passed away? He used to do 60 Minutes.
Ed Bradley.
Yes. And I was going, man, Reba and George Strait wouldn't have these people coming out for them. And to them, he's an author. So, Buffett opened my eyes. He has the best career there is. He doesn't have to pander to the gatekeepers at radio, even though Margaritaville is one of the biggest standards of all time. Off of one hit, he's got a career. I don't know. Buffett was good for me to studying the music business, and Bowen was too, because Bowen would tell me stories about Sinatra and all that kind of stuff, and then told me about Hank Jr. Nobody took Hank Jr. serious, and he decided to take him serious. And I don't know if you remember, but Hank he was selling 3 and 4 million back when nobody was selling that much, and he was winning Entertainer of the Year every year. And all those records that Bowen made on him, was just Country Boy Can Survive, and oh God, they were just awesome. I wanted to know who produced those records. It was him. Then I would just drill him about how did you do this and how did you do that, and I just learned that a producer, he said, step in when needed. Otherwise, the artist, if they have a vision of themselves, like Reba really does, and so does George, you just follow them and step in when needed. But sometimes you actually got to work. He said, with Hank Jr., I had to work because he couldn't get his vocals, and I had to spend days getting his vocals. And he said, and they want a drummer that played like everybody else. So he hired Buffett's drummer. I can't think of the guy's name now, but just the casting of the band for Hank Jr. was really important. So I learned that from Bowen too. I just did Cyndi Lauper last album, Detour, and when she came in, she interviewed everybody in town to cut it, and she picked me. And I said, "Don't tell me you picked me because I played with Elvis, because that seems to define my career." She said, "No, it was your hair." I said, "Damn." And she said, "No, it's because you seem," because I would argue about, she wanted to cut Into the World, and I said, the best version of that is Skeeter Davis. And I didn't realize Herman Hermits had cut it, and the only version she knew was Herman Hermits. And Seymour Stein was with her, Seymour Stein's like having Elvis in front of you. He's the Elvis of executives. Ahmet Ertegun, Seymour Stein, Clive Davis, David Geffen, Mo Austin. I hold them in such high esteem. And so he said, "Cyndi, he's right." And so I forgot about Herman's Hermits. Then I remembered that version. But so we get to the studio, and I realized I had to be on my A game because, man, she had done her work, And she did a Marty Robbins song I never heard. So I love stepping out on a limb, out of my comfort zone, and only because I think Bowen taught me how to do that. He really did. I don't think working with Reba or George taught me how to do it. And I think the job with Reba and George was I didn't blow it up. George got bigger when he hired me, but that movie did that for him. The movie was a stiff, but the album was a success and made him even a bigger star. And then Reba always wanted to cut fancy, and Bowen wouldn't do it on her because it's about a prostitute. I never knew that. I just loved Bobby Gentry's record of it because all the dynamics in it, and I wanted to see if I could make it sound like that, and we did. So, those things, I would have never had the nerve to do that without being trained by Bowen. So that's what Bowen did for me. I think he finally just he's so rich. He went to Scottsdale and he plays golf all the time. And now I'm like, I'm the old guard, and all these young dudes are producing all these records. And I was glad that Cyndi picked me to do this record, because doing a cover record like that, she was doing 40s, 50s, and 60s. Have you heard the album?
Yes, I have, and I loved it.
Yes, I loved it too, And I said, what I love about doing this, Cyndi? I said, this record is not to be made for radio. It's to be made for the critics to either say we were both slackers or it was a mediocre version of the original versions. So it's just got to be really good. And I love that challenge. And so it was fun, man. It was like fun cutting like Cowboy Sweetheart. I brought in Brian Sutton to play that flat top guitar, which nobody plays that way anymore, that Western swing stuff. And then Jeff, the guy that plays with the Sound Jumpers, to play the accordion. And then I had never worked with Jewel, and Jewel yodeled for me. She said, "I can't believe the only time I get to work with you is I have to yodel at 10 o'clock in the morning." But, just going through that record was fun. Our version of End of the World, I think the record company didn't know what to do with that. I think they could have got some airplay out of that record. And they just didn't know how to play the Nashville game, But I'm proud of that record. I put it on for actually listening enjoyment, just because it's just cool, And doing that thing with Allison Krauss, the Hard Candy Christmas, that was fun to do that. And then I played piano with Willie, because I don't play anymore, and she kept saying the piano player's playing too much. So I went to Steve Nathan, who was my go-to piano player. And I said, man, you're playing too much, Steve. You need to back off. He said, hey, man, I'm not doing anything. And so I said, do this. Floyd Kramer used to play only with his right hand on Patsy Cline, not even any left hand. And so I said, y'all start the song. It was easy. I said, what it was? What did we do? I can't remember. No, the Nightlife. And so I'm playing. So Cindy said, okay, you're playing the piano. I said, no, I don't play on record. I don't play anymore. She says, he just started again right now. And man, when the count off came in my headphones, I thought I was going to die. Because I was never a great session player, because I was traumatized by that. A player chokes on your session, he blows your session, and you just remember that. And all the records I played on, like with Elvis and Emmy Lou, we would rehearse those things for days before we would cut them, But in Nashville, they play a demo, and then you play it. And a lot of those takes are the first take, the first take. Our studio musicians are just unbelievable. So I know you didn't ask me to tell you that, but I just thought I'd tell you. I thought I'd just share it with you.
Well, what do you do when you meet somebody and they're in awe of you?
God, I don't ever think anybody's in awe of me. I mean, I can't imagine that. The only people that I know are in awe of me is when I go to a concert to see Reba or to see an artist. I'm just backstage or out front, and people that want to be in the business, they may be good, they may be a local yokel from a club. They go, you're Tony Brown. I go, yeah. Oh, man. And then you can tell that they really are in awe, and it's humbling, to tell you the truth, because, I mean, when I met Seymour Stein, I was pissing down my leg, man. So I still have that in me. I still have that in me. If I ever get a chance to meet Celine Dion, and I know that's probably not cool for young kids, but I just think she's better than Streisand, and I would just love to meet her and not sweat. I hope my hands wouldn't sweat, But I think the only time I've ever had somebody I worked with that was in awe of me was early in my days at MCA, when I would do like spec stuff on artists that I thought we should listen to. And I think me being there was a detriment as opposed to not being there, because they would be running it down when I was out of the room, and the engineer would say, man, they just killed it. And then I'd walk in the room, sit down, and say, let's do it. And they'd choke. And the engineer would say, they're just intimidated by you. And I was going, oh, they're not either. He said, yeah, I think so. So I've never seen that happen but a couple of times. But I've seen the thing where I could tell that they were in awe of me when it's like somebody in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I'm out there to see Trisha Yearwood play, and this is a person that plays a Holiday Inn club that does covers, and because when I met Seymour Stein, I wasn't expecting him to come over to my house with Cindy, and I figured I wouldn't have a problem meeting Cindy because he's such a cartoon, and I can deal with that kind of stuff. But Seymour Stein, I mean, I never thought in a million years I'd get to meet Seymour Stein. I never met Ahmet Ertegun. He was in a room one time in Nashville during CMA week, and he was on a cane. It was right before I think he fell off a stage at the Stones concert or something, didn't he? Something like that. But his wife is a real socialite, and she looks like the Queen of England. And she was walking with him, and so I saw him, and I just wanted to go touch him so maybe I could get a little juice from him or something. And then she put her arms up, and I didn't get to speak to him. And I just watched him walk away and went, man, that was Ahmet Ertegun. And I just love that feeling. I still love the fact that I can get in awe of people. It's because that's what got me in the business. I never got into business. It's more fun trying to make it than trying to sustain it once you've made it. I mean, that's the deal. Once you're trying to make it, some of the things I did in the beginning, never, like Steve Earle and Lyle Lovett, never made me any money. But Reba and George and Winona and Vince, Trisha made me a lot of money, but I kind of figured they would. But I believed so much in Steve Earle, but you know what, Paul? I think Steve Earle and the Lyle Lovett set the palette for me that I was a person who liked music, and I think I was a musician and not a suit, and they could come talk to me, and I saw it on their level. I remember when I was doing Lionel, Richie, and Willie on Tuskegee record. Have you heard that record?
Yeah.
It's a killer record, man. Anyway, so we're cutting, and so Willie's not. We're filming everything. We're cutting everything live. So Willie is not into the microphone, and we know we got to get him because he drove in just for the session. So Lionel said, "Hey Tony, tell Willie to get into the microphone so we can get this." I said, "You tell him." He said, "You tell him. You're the producer." I said, "I don't know him." He said, "But you're the producer. You go tell him." So I went in there and I was freaking out. So I said, "Hey Willie, hey man, can you just get closer into the microphone? And because we're going to try to get this while you're here, and at least some footage of you doing it, even if we have to sing it later." He said, "Man, I just don't know this song that well." And so I said, "If you'll just get close enough to sing it, your style of singing, these guys, Tom Bukovac and Matt Rollins, they never get to play on your records because you cut them down in Austin with Buddy Cannon, and it will just light this room up." And he looked at me, he says, kind of smiled and chuckled and says, "All right." And the next take was the take. It was amazing. But I just loved walking in there and feeling scared to know that I respect Willie Nelson so much that it scared me. And then it worked. I felt, man, can't stop. Can't touch this. So I don't know. I love every moment. Being in the A&R, whether you produce or not, is the best job because you get to express your taste, And as a musician, because I was a adequate piano player. I played with Elvis, and I played with Emmylou, and I played with Roseanne Cash. But those songs, I had studied them for days and years before I ever had to play them. And pretty much those were guitar-driven artists, like Elvis. James Burton was the guy that really drove the car there. And then with Emmylou, it was always Albert Lee or James Burton that drove it there too. And then with the Cherry Bombs, Vince Gill. So I just had to bang. So I knew my limits. And that's not saying that I cut myself short. I just knew what I could do. But I knew I had taste, And I let Johnny Gimble go when I started working with George Strait. And Bowen had always used Johnny Gimble because he used to play with Bob Wills. And when Bowen heard I had done that on Pure Country, he said, "Why did you do that?" I said, "He plays out of tune." and so I said, "Stuart Duncan is the best bluegrass fiddle player in the United States." And so George never mentioned it because Stuart knew how to play. There's Texas fiddle, there's Kentucky fiddle, there's all these different kinds of fiddles, He knew how to go right there. But flash forward a couple of years later, during CMA week, Johnny Gimble had just been put in the Hall of Fame in Texas Music Hall of Fame for being the Western swing fiddle player for Bob Wills. And I saw him coming down the hall with his wife, and he said, "There's the guy that fired me off the George Strait records." And I went, "Oh, God, I feel so bad." He said, "I'm just kidding with you, buddy." But anyway, I was just going, God, I did it for the right reasons. I wanted my records to sound a little better than Bowen's. The challenge was to make better records than Bowen made on Strait, and I don't think I did. I just made good ones. I made some really great records on George Strait that I'm really, really proud of. And I kept the thing going. Bowen had cut 23 they'd been 23 number ones up to that point. I took the next 37 up to 60 and cut the last number one he did, and that was my job, and I did it. And I did it well. So I think George is probably my best body of work I've done. If you were to go back and say, what's your best body of work? I would say it would be George because it stayed pretty authentic and I didn't contrive anything. But he wouldn't have let me anyway, but I didn't want to.
Well, if anyone wants information, they can visit the website. It's TonyBrownEnterprises.com. And again, the book is called ELVIS Straight to Jesus. And I'm going to kind of leave things open-ended.
Okay.
And I hope we get a chance to talk again one day. But what would you say to our listeners?
I would say, I mean, if they're wanting to be in the music industry, or music business, it's a great business to be in if you have the gift, and a gift of either being a record promotion man or running a label. But if you like being around musicians and songwriters, it's a very creative kind of little culture. And me being a musician who came to town to be a musician and ended up being a record executive, I ended up in the job that I should have ended up in, which is A&R. And I became president eventually, which I would have never imagined I'd be the president of a record company in Nashville. But the CEO above me, Bruce Hinton, he was the bottom line guy. I was the face of the music at the label. So I came here as a musician, ended up being with a record executive, but I ended up in the department where I kind of extended I lived through the musicians that I hired. There were certain piano players that played certain styles, and I knew I could book Pig Robbins for this style, Matt Robbins for this style, John Jarvis for this, Steve Nathan if I wanted Muscle Shoals, Reese Winans if I wanted Austin, Texas. And I got to live through the musicians. So my career has been a dream career, and I've been blessed by God. God really blessed me with putting me in the position that I've been in. And then someday I want to go back and cut a gospel record on somebody. Maybe Southern gospel doesn't exist anymore, but Reba just won a Grammy for a gospel record, and I talked her into doing that, to cutting that record, because of all the country artists, not many could really or want to cut a country record, and she's really a spiritual person. She's a Christian, and she cut it. And then when she won, I texted her because I was here. I was watching the Grammys. I said, "Congratulations on your Grammy, Reba." And she said, because the only other Grammy she had won was she won for Best Performance on a country record, and it was between her and Linda Davis, "Does He Love You?" But this was for the album. And she said, "You talked me into it. Thank you. I know it's just a gospel record, but it is a Grammy." And I said, "Reba, don't forget, the only Grammy Elvis ever won was for his gospel record, How Great Thou Art." And she said, "I never knew that." I said, "That's right. The only Grammy he won was for his gospel record." And he had no problem with that, because that was what he was aiming for anyway. So I just say, if you have a desire to be in this business, study, do your homework, just look at all the different parts of the industry, because being in production, doing the videos, doing the album covers, or even marketing, being a promotion guy, you get to go work with this thing you love, which is music. Because music is its own kind of world, and it attracts certain kinds of people, And like myself, I was a musician who ended up being a record executive, but I still think like a musician, and so I just encourage you, if this is what you want to do it. It's a fun place to be, and it's a great culture to be in, because it's creative people, and they have hearts and souls. And by the way, Paul, not to blow smoke up your butt, but interviews is a gift. It's an art form too, and out of every 10 interviews, I get a couple of good guys that know how to do it, and you know how to do it.
Thank you.
No, you do. And I've talked to Rolling Stone. I've talked to everybody, BBC, and some people just don't know how to do it, and some do. And you make me feel really comfortable. And as opposed to, I was sitting here wondering how many times I was going to stumble, and you were going to say, "Hey, do this," and you didn't know once. And so you kept me thinking, and I appreciate you let me do this. And everybody go pre-order my book, because I need to, in order to be on the New York bestseller list, I have to sell so many by the first week, and it's not that many. So, and I think you'll like the book. And go to my website, because on my website, I actually somebody sent me a shot a video of me playing my solo when Elvis introduced me, and I wouldn't take anything for it, so I put it on my website. And it's on there, so check it out. And Paul, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Mr. Brown. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Yes, sir.
Till next time.
Bye-bye.